Welcome back to the deep dive. I have to admit, usually when we start one of these, I feel like I've got a pretty firm grip on the topic.
Mhm.
We'll get a stack of sources on, I don't know, urban planning or the history of salt, and we can sort of see the path from A to B.
There's a clear narrative.
Exactly. But today is different. The sources we have in front of us are, they're dense, they are heavy, and to be honest, they're really challenging.
They certainly are. We're looking at a body of work that sits at this really strange, really fertile intersection. It's ancient history, linguistics,
Yeah.
but that it pulls in computer science and systems theory.
It's a combination you just don't see every day.
Not at all.
And I want to start with a feeling that I think a lot of us have, maybe most of us, even if we don't really talk about it.
Okay.
It's that feeling you get when you go to a museum, you're walking through, the ancient Egypt wing, and you see statues of gods with bird heads or jackal heads.
Right, the really alien-looking stuff.
Yeah. Or you decide, okay, I'm going to be intellectual today, and you try to read something like the Iliad or maybe a piece of scripture.
I know that feeling all too well.
And you read these stories, they're talking snakes and guys throwing lightning bolts and cities that have to be built on one specific hill because that's where a particular star rises. And your modern brain it hits a wall.
It does.
You think, okay, that's a cool story, a nice fairy tale. Or if you're feeling a bit more generous, you might think, well, these were primitive people. They didn't have Doppler radar, so they came up with the thunder god to explain the rain.
Right. It's that classic chronological snobbery, as C.S. Lewis called it.
Chronological snobbery.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, it's the assumption that just because we came later, we must be smarter. We treat the past like it was just a waiting room for us, for the modern world. We see their stories as basically failed science.
Yes. We're grading their paper with our answer keys, and of course, they fail. But the sources we've pulled for this deep dive, they're arguing something that, frankly, made my head spin when I first read it.
It's a big shift in perspective.
A huge one. They're suggesting we have it completely backward. They're arguing that these myths aren't failed science at all. They are, in fact, successful software.
It's a provocative idea, isn't it?
Mhm.
The core argument here is that we need to stop looking at these ancient narratives as fiction or simple entertainment and start seeing them as high-density encoding systems.
High-density encoding systems. That sounds like something straight out of a Silicon Valley tech manual, not a humanities class.
And that's entirely intentional. The researchers are using the language of systems theory and computer science on purpose to describe what the ancients were doing. They call it ancient linguistic architecture.
Ancient linguistic architecture.
The whole premise is that these stories were, and this is the key phrase, executable metaphysics. They weren't just describing reality. They were a tool used to simulate it, to process it, and to navigate it.
Executable metaphysics. Okay, I want to pause on that phrase because it feels like it's doing a lot of heavy lifting here. When I hear the word executable, I think of a .exe file on my computer. I double-click it, and a program runs. Something happens.
Precisely. And that's the exact analogy we need to hold on to for this whole discussion. A myth wasn't something you just believed in, not in the way we believe a fact, like Paris is the capital of France.
Right.
It was something you ran. It was a program you installed in your cognitive space to process the world.
Okay, so if we're running with the software analogy, then we have to talk about the operating system they ran on. Because if I try to run a Windows 95 program on my new MacBook, it's just not going to work.
It's completely incompatible.
And the sources spend a lot of time defining this environment of the ancient mind. They call it the holistic cognitive framework.
This is the absolute root of everything. If you don't grasp this part, none of the rest makes sense. To understand this ancient software, you have to accept that their cognitive operating system was fundamentally different from ours. We live in an analytic world.
Analytic. Break that down for me. I mean, I know what analysis is, but how does that define my entire world?
Well, just think about the word itself. Analysis comes from the Greek analuin, which means to loosen up, or more literally, to break apart.
To break apart.
Our entire intellectual tradition, for the last few centuries at least, is based on taking things apart to understand them. Just look at a modern university campus.
Okay, I'm picturing it. Big brick buildings, lots of trees.
Right. And in one of those buildings, you have the Department of Physics. Over there, in another one, you have the Department of Ethics.
Yeah.
And across the quad is the Department of Psychology.
Sure.
We assume, without even thinking about it, that the physical laws of gravity have absolutely nothing to do with the moral laws of good and evil. They're separate domains.
Of course. I mean, gravity doesn't care if I'm a good person. If I fall off a roof, I'm going to fall. That's physics. It's totally separate from my feelings or my morality.
Exactly. That is the analytic view in a nutshell. We isolate variables. We draw a hard line between the inner world of meaning and the outer world of facts. But the ancient view, this holistic view, it just didn't make that cut.
So you're saying for them, gravity and morality, they were connected. How does that even work?
In a fundamental sense, yes. In a holistic system, everything is integrated. Psychology, ethics, cosmology, social order, agriculture, it's all one single, seamless system. The movement of the stars in the sky and the movement of your own conscience are seen as part of the same continuous fabric.
Wow. That's really hard to wrap my head around. It just feels messy.
It feels messy to us because our minds are trained to categorize and separate, but to them it was coherent. And this is the key. That changes how language itself functions.
How so?
When we speak or write, we try to be precise by excluding things. We say, this is a cup, not a bowl. We use language to cut reality into smaller and smaller pieces.
We isolate the variable.
Yes. But in a holistic framework, language is constantly trying to connect things. It's trying to show you how the cup and the water in the cup and the person drinking and the ritual of drinking are all expressions of one single underlying pattern.
So, okay, let's bring it back to the myth as software idea. If the world is this one giant interconnected system, then the myth is the user manual, the tool that helps you navigate it.
That's a good start. The thesis statement for this whole deep dive, based on these sources, is basically this. Ancient myths were structured technologies used to simulate reality, not just describe it.
Right. Structured technologies. Okay. I want to challenge this a little bit because it sounds very high-minded, very abstract. I want to know what it actually looks like on the ground.
Let's do it.
Section 1 of our notes is titled Myth as Executable Code. The sources keep using this analogy of programmer metaphysics. But how does a story actually function like an app? Because, again, I can't go to the App Store and install the Epic of Gilgamesh on my phone.
No, you can't install it on your silicon, that's true. But you can install it on your neurology. Think about what an application actually does at its most basic level. An app is a constrained environment for processing input.
Okay.
You put data in, the code applies a set of rules to that data, and it gives you a predictable output.
Input, rules, output. Got it.
Now let's apply that to a myth. Let's take something really common, like the hero's journey structure, which you find in almost every ancient culture in some form.
The Joseph Campbell stuff.
Exactly. Now, that isn't just a story you listen to for fun. It's a processing filter for your own life. It's a piece of software.
Okay, show me how.
Let's say you have an input. You lose your job. Or you go through a terrible breakup. Something bad happens.
Right, that's the raw data. Life throws you a curveball.
Exactly. Now, without the myth, in our modern, analytic, fragmented world, how do you process that? What are the rules? Well, there aren't many.
Yeah.
It's just random chaos.
Yeah.
It's bad luck. It's market forces. It's someone else's fault. You feel like a victim.
And the output is probably depression, anxiety, a feeling of powerlessness.
Precisely. The output is suffering. You just keep asking, why me? But if your mind is running the hero's journey software, the code gives you a completely different set of rules to interpret that data. The myth says, this isn't a random accident. This is the call to adventure, or this is the belly of the whale. This is the road of trials.
So the myth is relabeling the metadata of the experience. It's changing the tag from tragedy to plot point.
It rewrites it completely. It forces you to interpret the suffering not as an accident, but as a test.
Yeah.
And because you interpret it as a test, your output, your actual physiological behavioral response changes.
Also.
You stand up a little straighter. You start looking for the lesson.
Yeah.
You act with agency because the story you're in demands a hero, not a victim. The myth has just executed a change in your biological reality. Your cortisol levels might drop. Your posture changes. You make different choices.
That's, when you put it that way, it's actually a very functional definition of what people used to call magic.
Or it's a functional definition of cybernetics. It's a feedback loop. Your interpretation changes your reality, which changes your interpretation. The sources call this the programmer metaphysics. These ancient storytellers weren't just entertainers sitting around a fire.
They were coding the social operating system.
They were. If everyone in the tribe runs the hero software, the whole society becomes more resilient. If everyone runs the victim software, the society collapses under the first sign of pressure.
This connects to another concept I saw in the notes, the idea of compression. The sources talk about these stories being incredibly high density. Is that because they had to pack so much utility, so much code into them?
That's exactly it. Think about the bandwidth of the ancient world. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have cloud storage. They had oral tradition. And if they were lucky, some very expensive, very hard to make scrolls.
Data storage was at a premium.
A massive premium. So they had to be unbelievably efficient.
Yeah.
In our world, we have low density, high volume data. You have a physics textbook, a law book, a psychology textbook, and a novel about grief. 4 different books for 4 different domains.
Yeah, and none of them talk to each other. The physicist doesn't care what the novelist thinks.
Not at all. But in the ancient world, a single narrative like the myth of Osiris in Egypt had to do all of those jobs at once. It had to function as the physics textbook by explaining the cycles of the Nile and the seasons. It had to be the law book by explaining the divine right and role of the king. And it had to be the novel, explaining the universal human experience of death, grief, and rebirth.
So it was all compressed, all zipped into one single narrative file.
A story like the Odyssey, then, isn't just a story about a guy trying to get home. It's the encyclopedia, it's the Constitution, and it's a PTSD survival guide all rolled into one.
Wow.
And that's what made it a generative space. It's another key term from the sources.
Generative space.
Yeah, because the structure was so robust and it connected all these different domains, you could use the myth to simulate new situations. A king facing a famine could ask, what would Odysseus do in a similar situation? And the system, the story, generates an answer, a template for action.
It's like a sandbox game.
How do you mean?
Like in a video game where the physics engine is set, the basic rules of the world are set, but you can build whatever you want within it. The myth provides the engine and the rules, and the culture can then use it to build solutions to new problems.
That's a perfect modern analogy. It creates a space where you can simulate interior and exterior realities at the same time and see how they connect.
Okay, I want to pivot here because we've been talking about apps and engines in the abstract. I want to see this code running. I want to look at a specific line of code from history and see if we can decompile it. And the example used in the sources, I have to say, it's a bold choice. I know it's going to be controversial for some people, but I think it's the perfect test case for this theory. We're talking about the relationship between Jesus and Judas.
Yes, a fascinating and very loaded case study. And you're right, we need to be very clear about our approach here.
Go ahead.
We aren't doing theology. We are not here to debate historical divinity or the tenets of faith. We are looking at this purely through the lens of system architecture. We are analyzing the narrative structure as a piece of technology.
Right. So let's start with the interface reading, the way most of us see the story on the surface today. It's a moral story. Jesus is the good guy, the hero. Judas is the bad guy, the villain.
It's a cowboy movie, white hat, black hat.
Exactly.
And that is precisely how the modern analytic mind reads it. We see 2 separate individuals making separate, independent moral choices. One is right, one is wrong. It's binary. It's a 1 and a 0.
But the sources suggest a totally different reading. A structural reading. They call it an isomorphic structure. Can you unpack that? Because isomorphic is definitely a $10 word.
It is. It comes from mathematics and biology, and it just means having the same form or a corresponding structure. The argument here is that Jesus and Judas aren't just 2 random guys, one good and one bad. They are a dyad.
A dyad?
They are 2 poles of a single ontological system.
Like 2 sides of the same coin.
That's getting closer. Think of it more like an electrical circuit. To have a current, you need a positive terminal and a negative terminal. The sources describe this kind of narrative as narrative dialogue, as externalized interior tension.
Okay, that's another mouthful. Externalized interior tension.
Think about the human psyche. We all have it. We all have an inner truth, our authentic self, our spiritual core, whatever you want to call it. But we also all have a public image, a social role, a mask, a function we have to perform out in the world.
Right, the inner me and the outer me. Who I am versus what I do.
Exactly. Now, in the structural reading of the story, Jesus represents the interior truth. Judas represents the public image, the social role, the externalized function that has to operate in the material world of politics and money.
Whoa. Wait a minute. So if that's a structure, then the interaction between them isn't just a simple betrayal. It's a mechanism.
It is narrative ontology. It is a model, a diagram of how truth actually enters the world. And if you look at some of the Gnostic texts that the sources reference, specifically Gospel of Judas, it makes this reading much more explicit. But even in the canonical text, just think about the mechanics of the story.
Okay.
How does this private, internal, spiritual truth represented by Jesus become a public, universal reality that changes the world. It has to be handed over to the world.
Moved it over.
Yes, the Greek word that we usually translate as betray is paradidomi, but its more literal, more common meaning is to hand over, to deliver, or to transmit. It's a transactional term, not just a moral one.
So for the system of the narrative to work, the external role, Judas, must hand over the internal truth, Jesus, so that the original form can be broken and the truth can be released to everyone.
The vessel has to be broken for the light to shine out. In this reading, Judas isn't a villain in the Marvel movie sense.
Okay.
He is a necessary component of the machine.
He's the negative terminal on the battery.
He is a structural necessity. You have a positive terminal and a negative terminal. You don't get angry at the negative terminal. You don't call it evil. You don't say, oh, I hate that negative terminal. Let's get rid of it.
No, of course not. If you get rid of it, the battery doesn't work. The circuit is broken. There's no flow of energy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is the holistic view. In a holistic framework, the shadow or the antagonist isn't something to be simply hated and eliminated. It's something that performs an essential function. It grounds the current. The source calls this relational integration. The story is depicting a single system working itself out through two opposite poles.
It completely changes the entire feeling of the story. It goes from a personal tragedy about a bad friend to this incredibly complex, impersonal diagram of how transformation happens.
It does.
It implies that what we call betrayal or breakdown is actually a necessary part of the machinery of revelation.
Yes. And this brings us to the tragedy of what the sources call interpretive collapse.
Interpretive collapse. That sounds like a structural failure in a bridge or a building.
That's a very good way to picture it. As history moved forward and our way of thinking became more and more analytic, more focused on dissecting, labeling, and moralizing, we lost the integrative narrative literacy that was needed to decode this kind of structure.
We couldn't read the blueprint anymore.
I forgot how. We stopped seeing the structural the battery. We just saw the surface level story. We saw good guy and bad guy. We collapsed a complex structural polarity into a simple moral opposition.
We basically lost the password to the high-density encoding.
And when you lose that literacy, you start trying to eliminate the Judas function from your own life. You try to get rid of your own shadow. You try to be all light, all positive. And structurally, what happens when you remove the negative terminal from the battery?
The power goes out. The whole system crashes.
Precisely. The software fails to execute. The transformation doesn't happen.
You know, that implies something really humbling, doesn't it?
How so?
It implies that the ancient authors who wrote these things, whether it was the Gnostics or the Gospel writers or the Sumerian myth makers before them, were operating at an incredible level of sophistication.
It completely challenges that chronological bias we talked about at the start.
It shatters it.
The sources suggest that these ancient authors possessed a dense, recursive, symbolic capacity that we, in our modern world, struggle to even recognize, let alone replicate.
They were playing 4D chess with narrative, and we're over here playing checkers thinking we're smarter because we have microwaves and smartphones.
In terms of this specific capacity for symbolic integration, yes, we have much better dentists, but they might have had better metaphysicians.
I'll definitely take the dentist, but I see your point. Now, I want to move this from the text, from the abstract world of stories into the real world, because this holistic view wasn't just in books or scrolls. It was literally built into the physical landscape.
Yeah.
Section 3, Applied Metaphysics Architecture and the Stars.
This is the transition from text to stone, and it's where the app analogy we've been using becomes very literal, very physical.
We see this all over the ancient world, right? You have the pyramids in Egypt that are aligned to Orion's belt. You have temples in Central America aligned to the solstices. You have stone circles in Europe aligned to, all sorts of celestial events.
It's a global phenomenon.
And the standard explanation I usually hear is one of a few things. Either they were just obsessed with the sky, or it was for farming to know when to plant, or, the fun one, aliens.
Or that it was purely decorative. A nice aesthetic choice. Let's point the main door that way because the sunrise looks good through it in the morning.
Right. But our sources are arguing something much more profound. They're saying, no, this wasn't decoration. This was ontological necessity.
Ontological necessity.
Why necessity? Why did it have to be that way?
We have to go back to that holistic framework. Remember, the inner world, the human mind, spirit, breath, and the outer world, the cosmos, the stars, the sun, are continuous. They are not separate. They are part of one unified system.
Okay, that's the core principle.
So if you were building a temple, which is symbolically the container for your society's collective mind, it must align with the container of the universe itself.
It's not a choice. It's a requirement of the
It
system.
is absolutely not a choice. The sources call this coherence maintenance or structural coherence.
Mm.
If you build a temple that was out of alignment with the stars, you wouldn't just be building an ugly or a poorly designed temple.
What would you be doing?
You'd be creating metaphysical dissonance.
Metaphysical dissonance. I love that phrase. It goes back to the operating system analogy again, doesn't it?
How do you see it?
It's like, if you're a programmer writing an app for an iPhone, you have to follow the rules of iOS. The operating system has a certain structure. If you write code that ignores that structure or contradicts the operating system, what happens?
Your app crashes.
Right. It doesn't just look bad, it fundamentally doesn't work. It breaks.
That is the perfect analogy. For the ancients, the cosmos was the operating system. The stars, the sun, the cycles of the moon, that was the hardware that reality runs on. So to build a monument that ignored those cycles would be like writing code that contradicts the OS. It would imply a break in reality itself. It would be, in a very real and terrifying sense, broken architecture.
So these buildings are basically crystallized models of their worldview.
Yes, they are material evidence. They're fossils of a way of thinking. We can't go back and interview an ancient Egyptian priest, but we can measure his temple with modern instruments. And the fact that the temple aligns so perfectly with their known cosmology is empirical proof that they were, in fact, operating under this unified cognitive framework.
It's applied metaphysics. Cosmology is literally constraining the engineering and the design, which is just so cool because we don't do that anymore.
Not at all.
We build a skyscraper wherever the zoning laws and the property lines say we can. We don't consult an astrologer to check where Venus is rising.
Because we've completely separated engineering from cosmology. We view a building as a machine for living in, which is distinct from the universe outside it. They viewed a building as a microcosm of the universe. For them, to build was to repeat the original act of creation.
Okay, so we've looked at stories as code, we've looked at buildings as code. Now I want to zoom in even further, down to the level of individual words.
The linguistic level.
Well, yes, because there is a very specific, almost cautionary section in the sources that warns us about being too eager to find these connections. It's a lesson in intellectual rigor.
It is.
We've been sitting here saying everything is connected, but the sources step in and say, hold on, not so fast. Don't be sloppy about it.
Ah, yes. You're talking about the case of Zeus and Zoe. This is where the amateur historian of ideas gets separated from the serious researcher.
Right. And I have to admit, I read this section and I fell right into the trap. Immediately.
It's an easy one to fall into.
So you have two Greek words. You have Zeus, the head honcho of the Olympian gods, and you have Zoe, the Greek word for life, especially vibrant, animating life.
Mm-hmm.
They both start with Z. They have that same kind of buzzy, energetic sound. My brain, your brain, anyone's brain immediately goes, oh, obviously, Zeus means life. They're the same word. They must be related.
It is a very common assumption. It feels intuitively correct, almost poetic. And the sources are very, very strict here, that intuition is factually wrong.
Okay, walk me through my failure. Why am I wrong?
You're failing on the level of etymology, which is the historical study of word origins. If you actually trace the history of those two words back through time, you find that they're complete strangers. They have no common ancestor.
Really?
Not at all. The word Zoe comes from the verb zach, which means to live. Its roots are all about biological animation. But the name Zeus comes from a much older Proto-Indo-European root, dias, which means sky, brightness, or daylight.
So linguistically, they have absolutely no shared DNA. They're not related at all.
None whatsoever. They are like two people who happen to look alike, but come from completely different families on opposite sides of the world. And this is really important because if you go around saying Zeus means life, just based on the sound, you are making a false connection. You're building your argument on sand.
But, oh, and this is the twist in the deep dive that I just loved. The sources don't stop there. They say, okay, wait a minute. Even though the linguistic roots are different, there is something else happening. There's a symbolic convergence.
This is the nuance. This is the difference between sloppy New Agey synthesis and deep, rigorous synthesis.
Okay.
Even though the words come from totally different places, in the system of the myth, in the way the culture actually used them, they end up occupying the same territory. They both point to the animating principle.
Okay, break that down for me. How can they overlap if they aren't related?
Well, let's look at their function in the system. What is Zeus, functionally? He's the sky father. He's the source of cosmic order. He wields the lightning bolt, which is a symbol of pure, raw energy. He is the mythic personification of the universe's vitality.
Right. He's the big battery in the sky.
Exactly. And now, what is Zoe? In the Greek texts, and especially later in Gnostic and philosophical texts, it's not just biological life, it's the abstracted principle of living spiritual vitality. It's the divine spark.
So one is the person, the character in the story, Zeus, and one is the principle, the abstract concept, Zoe, but they're both trying to name the same fundamental energy.
Precisely. They're both pointing at the force that makes the universe run and makes us alive. So the true connection isn't linguistic. They don't share a root word. The connection is structural. They perform a similar job within the cognitive system.
That is such a crucial and subtle distinction. It's the difference between saying these words sound alike and saying these concepts do the same work in the engine of the worldview.
And it highlights the need for extreme care. If we're really trying to reverse engineer these ancient systems, we have to be meticulous. We have to know the difference between a coincidence of sound and a true convergence of structure. You have to check your roots, do the hard work.
So we've done the reverse engineering. We've looked at the code in stories, in buildings, in words. We've checked our roots. Now comes the big question, the so what?
The modern relevance.
Yeah. Why does any of this matter to someone listening to this deep dive in the 21st century? We aren't building pyramids. We aren't, for the most part, worshiping Zeus. We have iPhones and AI and global supply chains.
No, but we are building systems, immensely complex systems. And this is where the sources draw a really fascinating and powerful parallel between ancient mythic architecture and modern AI.
Which on the surface seems like the furthest thing possible from ancient myth. But the connection they draw is scaling cognition.
Exactly. Think about what the myth did for the ancient mind. It allowed a single human being to think about physics, ethics, agriculture, and society all at the same time, using a single story as the container for all that complexity.
It let them think bigger than their own brain.
It allowed thought to exceed the limits of a single, isolated, individual brain. It was, in a very real sense, an artificial intelligence. It was an artifact, a technology we built to help us think better.
And now look at what we are trying to do with AI and systems theory today.
Look at it. Look at things like climate models or large language models.
Yep.
What are we trying to do? We're trying to build technological systems that can hold massive, massive amounts of diverse data weather patterns, economic data, social media trends, the entire history of language, and find the hidden patterns, the coherence between them.
My God, we're trying to build a holistic model of the world.
We're being forced to. Both systems, the ancient myth and the modern AI, are attempts to scale cognition. They are tools for holding coherence across multiple, seemingly separate domains simultaneously.
So when we prompt a large language model today, we are, in a weird way, doing something very similar to what an ancient priest did when consulting an oracle or a myth. We're asking a high-density encoding system to help us manage reality.
The system doesn't replace our intelligence. It expands the field in which our intelligence can operate. And the source makes a beautiful point here. It says we're moving away from the era of analytic differentiation, where we spent the last few centuries taking every single thing apart.
And we're moving back towards systemic integration. We're trying to figure out how to put it all back together.
Yes. We are finally realizing, through our own complex problems, that you can't understand the climate without understanding the economy. And you can't understand the economy without understanding human psychology. And you can't understand psychology without understanding biology. We are being forced by the complexity of our own world to become holistic again.
That is just an incredible irony, isn't it? Our most advanced, forward-looking technology is forcing us to think like our most ancient ancestors.
It's a full circle. Modern technology, things like recursive modeling, network theory, systems theory, is finally giving us the vocabulary and the tools to understand ancient narrative technology. We can finally see what they were doing because we are, in our own way, starting to try to do it ourselves.
We are building our own oracles.
In a sense, yes.
That honestly gives me goosebumps. It's like we're finally learning to read the source code of our ancestors because we've just started writing our own.
And that is the reconstruction. It's not about going back to worshiping the sun or abandoning science. It's about recovering the lost art of seeing the world as a whole.
So let's try and wrap this up. We have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started with this core idea that myths are software, not failed science, but a kind of executable metaphysics. We looked at how they function as interfaces and engines, how they take the raw input of suffering and output a framework for meaning.
We did. Then we dove into the Jesus-Judas diet. seeing it not as a simple moral soap opera, but as a structural battery positive and negative terminals working together to create a current of transformation.
And we saw how that same thinking was made solid in stone, how ancient architecture was applied metaphysics, aligning the human world with the cosmic world because the operating system demanded it.
And we learn to be rigorous with our symbols, to distinguish the false connection of Zeus and Zoe from the true structural one.
And finally, we connected it all to our own moment. This great ironic circle from the analytic back toward the holistic, driven by our own new technologies like AI.
The idea that we are building the next generation of mythic intelligence, whether we realize it or not.
It has been quite a journey, and I think the sources leave us with a really potent, provocative final thought to chew on. A question, really, for you, the listener.
They do. The thought is this. If ancient narratives were a public technology for interior education, if they were the software that people ran to structure their inner lives, to handle grief, to understand their purpose, what is our current technology doing to our interior education?
That's the question, isn't it? We have these incredibly powerful analytic tools. We have Google in our pockets. We have AI that can write a sonnet. We have infinite data. But have we lost the integrative literacy that's required to understand the big picture of our own existence?
We have all the data points in the world, but do we have a coherent story that connects them? We have the inputs, but do we still have the executable code that turns all those inputs into wisdom? Or is our OS just constantly crashing?
I really encourage you, the listener, to just sit with that for a bit. And the next time you read an old story or you visit a museum and see a fragment of a temple, or even just look up at the stars, don't just look at the surface. Don't just dismiss it as a pretty story or primitive science.
Try to see the code underneath.
Try to see the system.
Because the system is still there.
Yeah.
We just have to learn how to run it again.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.